Hi, my name is Hannah. Welcome back to my channel, Savage Reads. I have reread quite a few books this last week, and I'm excited to talk about my second impressions of some of these books, and also a new book that I've read this week. But quickly, I have my crafting update. So I finished the back to the sweater. Honestly, to me, it kind of looks like a giant lump right now, but it's the back piece. I have no idea what's happening, but I've started on the front piece right here. We'll see what happens. I am hoping that it turns out, because I swear about once a year, I think I should knit myself a sweater, and then I knit myself a sweater and I end up not liking it and I give it to someone, and that's a bit of a bummer. So we'll see. At least it's been keeping me busy. I find the process of knitting to be very relaxing, and so it's nice to have a project, especially one that is a little more complex and will take a little longer. This has taken me nearly a month to get to the point where I am at now, and so it'll be another couple months until I finish the sweater. But let's get into what books I have read. Okay, so let's start talking about some of these books that I have read this last week that have been repeat reads for me. So the first one I did not realize was a repeat read, but I read The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. Now, I did not remember that I read this book in 2019, and at the time I read this book and I gave it 3 stars. I don't remember why. I have no idea, because when I went back and read this book, it was a 5-star read for me this time. And it is just such a testament to how books can affect you at different times, depending on what is going on with your life, what kinds of experiences you've had, what other books you have read in the meantime, because this was a brilliant book. This book follows Esther Greenwood, and she is talented. She has so much going for her. She has so much promise, but she slowly starts to break down over the course of the book. And it follows this experience and makes it feel just so relatable. I feel like I not only have known Esther, I have been Esther. And the idea itself of the bell jar was such a powerful metaphor for me. The feeling of being suffocated and trapped and in this stale environment, while also being completely unable to see what is outside of yourself clearly because of the distorting effect of this jar over you. It really illustrates a lot of feelings that I have had and that I know people go through, and it is such an excellent critique on feminism and how women are treated in the medical profession and how mental health is dealt with. It just was a brilliant book, and I have no idea why I read this, didn't really care for it, and forgot completely about it, because this time reading it was a completely different experience. This book reminds me to not be scared to try books again, because sometimes it is the time and place in which you are reading, and this book was such a success this time going through it. Now, the next book was a book that I picked up because I needed something a little bit light, a little bit fun, and when I feel that way, I often turn to David Sedaris. So I picked up Calypso by David Sedaris again. I have read this book before, and this time I went and listened to it, which is always a delightful experience. If you want to pick up a David Sedaris book, I highly recommend to pick them up on audio, because his delivery is just fantastic. And I love this kind of humor writing. I love his observations on the world, but also him dealing with some very real and difficult experiences in his family, dealing with loss and sickness and trying to come to terms with things. So I just think that David Sedaris always does a good job. I enjoyed this one. If you've read a David Sedaris book, typically they are collections of essays. This is a very easy one to get into, listen to a story or two, and I always just have a good time with these books. So I'm really glad that I picked it up again. I thought that maybe picking up the exact same one that I had read before would maybe make it not as fun of an experience, but honestly, enough time had passed that They felt rather new to me, and it was still a really fun experience. I did have about 4 years in between the first time I read it and the next time, so the stories were very much familiar, but the delivery, the punchlines, the jokes, it was a great time going through this. Now, for my last reread that I want to talk about, I picked up The K by Theodore Taylor. Now, this is a very short book, and the reason that I picked it up is we decided to listen to it in the car. My daughter and I were driving off to one of her basketball games, and I wanted something short that we could listen to together, and I remember really liking this book as a kid. So I thought, okay, great, we are going to pick it up. All I really remembered about this book was young boy trapped on an island, some storms. That is the extent of my memory, other than I enjoyed this book as a child. What I had forgotten about this book is that the main theme really is getting past racism. And this book takes place in World War II, where we have our young child hero who is named Philip. And when the freighter that he is traveling on with his mother gets torpedoed in the Caribbean, he ends up on a lifeboat with no one else besides a man named Timothy. And Philip has to confront the racism that his mother instilled in him so that he can learn how to get along with Timothy. Now, this book had a lot of really great things. I think as a starting point for conversations with kids about racism, it's a really good one for that. Now, this book was first published back in 1969, and I do think that the author, consciously or unconsciously, did use some language that felt very subtle but also racially charged. So while some of the racism was very apparent and was talked about in the book, I do think some of the descriptions of Timothy and the characterization of Timothy might have been subtly told in words that may have shared some racist ideas. And I do think that it was a good one to read or listen to with my daughter. Instead of just handing this over, we could listen to it together. I could stop the book and say, hey, did you see how that description was? What do you think about that? Why do you think the author chose to use those descriptions? And I thought that it was really great from a discussion point of view. Another choice that I think the author made that from a modern lens, I start feeling a little bit wary of, is that in order to help Philip learn to accept Timothy, the author has him become literally blind in this book. And at a certain point in the book, the turning point, as it were, where we realize that Philip has gotten over these feelings of racism, he is blind and he asks Timothy, Timothy, are you still black? Because to him, he no longer can see color, which I feel like is a little bit problematic. Instead of having Philip actually come to terms with people can look different than you and you need to accept and love them for their differences, it was very much that, oh, we're all people because I don't see color, which I think is a little bit of a problematic message. But I do think, especially for the time that this came out and for the discussions that came about with it, I do think that this was a really well done book. And the other thing that I really enjoyed about the audiobook, I know that Timothy was written in dialect and it came across much better on an audiobook. I think I would have been a little bit annoyed if I had been trying to read it, especially read it out loud. And it had an interview with the author, which was really interesting to see the research that went into it, his intentions behind things, to really understand where he was coming from. And I think that really helped with the discussion that my daughter and I had about the book. This is a very short book, but I do think that it has a lot of potential for great discussions with children when you read this book together. Now, the last book that I want to talk about was thankfully not a reread. I read Tuesdays at the Castle by Jessica Day George to my daughters out loud. I may be biased against this book just a little bit because we decided to read this book right after finishing the Keys to the Kingdom series, and I loved reading that series out loud. The writing was so good in that series, and if I needed evidence to show how good the writing was in that series, all I needed to do was pick this up and realize, oh, this is what children's literature could be like. Oh, okay. So the description for this book says, Tuesdays at Castle Glower are Princess Selly's favorite days. That's because on Tuesdays the castle adds a new room, a turret, or sometimes even an entire wing. No one ever knows what the castle will do next, and no one, other than Sally that is, takes the time to map out the new additions. But when King and Queen Glower are ambushed and their fate is unknown, it is up to Sally, with her secret knowledge of the castle's never-ending twists and turns, to protect their home and save their kingdom. So you have the plucky young protagonist, you feel like you've got some big stakes. I think the setup's okay, but the writing was clunky. Instead of having some real problem solving, it turned into a pranking Home Alone type story for a while. And the castle having these magical abilities started to feel less like something cool to explore and learn about, and more like a plot device to let the author do whatever she wanted in this story. I just found this book to be really tedious to get through, and I was bugged that I had to read this out loud. I am so glad to be done with it, and I am not going to be reading the sequels out loud. That was my limit because I didn't enjoy it. The girls liked it okay, and I think for a younger age group, sure, go have your kids read these, but I don't think an adult audience would like it. And personally, when I get books for my girls, I do want it to be something that stands up a little to a bit more scrutiny and will entertain me as well as them. I want to be excited about the books I'm reading out loud. This was written as a middle grade children's novel, but it felt middle grade children's juvenile. Instead of having any real messages, it just felt overly simplistic. The pacing was all wonky in this book. There just were enough things in this that I'm like, there are so many children's books that are so much better than this. And that is what I have read the last week. If you have any thoughts on these books, let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you all in the next one.